My credentials for this video are not only that I'm chronically online, but also that I have been online within the knitting, crochet, fibre arts world for a good 4 years at this point. And I feel like I've got a good grasp on the hot topics that are being discussed within the knitting and crocheting community, sometimes to my joy and sometimes to my disappointment and frustration. But yeah, I thought I would maybe discuss some of my possibly controversial opinions about things going on within the knitting and crocheting community, not only things that have been spoken about online, also other general things that I've been thinking about. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to be working on one of my crochet projects. I made all of these granny squares ages ago, but it is finally time to connect them into one super long rectangle, which I'm then going to fold in half and turn into a bag. I'm going to use this colour to go around all the edges, and I'm going to use the join as you go method, which is my absolute favourite whenever I have to somehow join the squares. So that's what I'm going to do at the same time. So go ahead, grab a drink, grab some knitting or crocheting, and yeah, let's dive into it. I feel like it goes without saying that a lot of these things are my personal opinion, so please do not take any of this personally. I know I said that my credentials are me having been on the internet for a fair amount of years, but honestly, who am I to say anything about anyone or anything? So yeah, take everything with a grain of salt. There's some of these things it's just supposed to be a bit of fun, and some of the other things I do feel quite passionate about, but yeah, don't feel attacked by any of what I'm saying, please. As a good example, the first thing that I really don't like is anything felted or anything brushed out. This actually started with a very strong dislike against projects that are brushed out. So like most of the time sort of like mohair project, especially I've seen it with like the sort of skinny scarves, and they start to get the brush out and brush it out to make it fluffy. I hate it instantly. I always think it looks better before it was brushed out, and I also think if you're trying to achieve the kind of fluffy look, I think it always looks better when you're working with a yarn that is fluffy already in nature and you make it purposefully fluffy. The same kind of goes for felting. Now, I definitely don't think this is a particularly popular opinion because everything is felted at the moment, obviously with the success of the sailor slippers. With felting, I can see more of a purpose, obviously, than with like brushing out mohair, but I still don't think we need to felt everything. I get why everyone is doing it because the sailor slippers did so well and it's like a fun process, and you can knit or crochet with really chunky yarn, create something sort of more solid. But recently, I feel like it's gotten a little bit out of hand. Unfortunately, majority of the projects that I'm seeing, I don't like that much. The next thing is kind of something that I've seen every now and again people talk about on TikTok, and that is that I don't think overconsumption is really a thing or a problem within the fibre arts community. I've seen people talk about how creating lots and lots of projects within a year very quickly is overconsumption, and I really feel like we are focusing on the wrong thing. Someone knitting 10 jumpers in a year because they enjoy making that is not a problem. There is obviously a problem if things are being made and then thrown away because they're not being used or whatever. Like a carelessness and lack of mindfulness, I think, is obviously a problem, but I don't think we need to be looking down on people creating things, using their creativity, being offline, because what's the alternative? I don't personally feel particularly attacked or affected by this, but maybe this is something that I feel passionate about because I do knit and crochet quickly, so things are finished very quickly. And then what am I supposed to do? Am I just supposed to wait around because someone on the internet said that I'm doing things too quickly? Like, alternatively, what I'm going to do is be on my phone, scroll TikTok, do some unnecessary online shopping, I don't know, whatever people's vices are. Then there's obviously also the part of like people over consuming yarn or like buying too much yarn and then like possibly not using it. I understand why people have an issue with that, and that definitely should be paid attention to more. I do think that's an easy fix, you know, if you're supporting local businesses, local yarn, you actually use a lot of yarn. Again, if you're knitting a lot, you're making a lot of projects in the year, you're going to need a lot more yarn. That's fine. I think there's also an argument to be had where buying different types of yarn to experiment with brings you a lot more knowledge and a lot more expertise with using certain fibers. Maybe I'm not aware of the size of people's yarn stashes. I can see how that could be potentially unethical and overconsumption, but within like creating projects, like I really don't think this was a conversation that the previous generation of knitters and crocheters were having. I could be wrong completely, but if someone wants to knit 10 different cardigans every year, I don't have a problem with that. There is purpose within fiber arts beyond the finished product. If the process of knitting and crocheting brings you comfort and inner peace, then that in itself is useful and purposeful. And yeah, if that then leads to creating lots of different things, like 50 different hats or 20 different pairs of socks every year, I just really think we should let people get on with it. I keep having to take breaks to follow my own instructions on how to join, and it has been a while, and I want to make sure that the instructions that I wrote down actually make sense. So this is how the first row is looking. It's very cute. But the third thing I wanted to mention is that I personally think majority of notions that are being sold and advertised are completely unnecessary. Don't get me wrong, there are things that you definitely need, like a nice pair of scissors, some small scissors, and a measuring tape, and that's it. Really. Stitch markers are super helpful and definitely necessary, but you don't need to buy lots of them. You don't need super expensive ones. You, in fact, most likely don't even need to buy them. I always just use hoop earrings that I have. I have a bunch of safety pins lying around that I love to use. Safety pins are great. They are essentially what a stitch marker is. They just advertise the stitch marker as something like more specific. I do have like a big box of stitch markers, like metal ones, and they are great to have, but they are definitely not necessary. And I'm really not into notions personally. I don't love buying them. I don't need them. I don't use them. I know some people are really into them, but I just don't think it's a necessity at all in order to succeed within knit and crochet. This is such a weird dislike that I have. I really hate the term object for like a finished project. So, you know, someone talking about their finished object or the object they're currently working on, something about it just pisses me off. I don't know why. Like, I much prefer saying project. It's the project that I'm working on and the finished project. This is such a personal preference that I'm having, but yeah, for some reason I can't stand when people say objects. Right, I took an even longer break, but I've now connected 6 of the squares and everything else, like all the other instructions, are the same now, so I can focus a bit better now. I think that not being size inclusive in knit and crochet patterns is incredibly lazy and very ignorant, and I don't think there's any excuse not to be size inclusive. Being able to grade your patterns for larger and smaller sizes is difficult, and the only other option if you're not able to do it yourself is to pay someone. So you obviously have to have, you know, the funds to be able to work with people who can either grade patterns for you or coach or teach you to do it yourself. That obviously isn't a possibility for everyone, and I do think with beginner pattern writers there is, you know, a sort of excuse or leeway for less size inclusivity, but everyone else needs to be size inclusive. There are no excuses. You know, big designers or even medium designers should have either the experience and knowledge or the funds to be able to make their patterns accessible to everyone and to also do so well. I learned so much from working with really good tech editors who have really good understanding of grading things to fit different body sizes, because not everything can just be multiplied to fit that size, and it has to also make sense in terms of the shaping. For example, one tech editor explained to me how a drop shoulder has to hit at this exact point of the arm across all the sizes. So if I was to simply multiply my instructions for like my size for like a 5XL, the drop shoulder would be all the way at the bottom here. So you have to write things differently for almost every size in terms of increases and decreases to make things fit properly. And that takes time, it takes effort, and I think it's really lazy and ignorant when people don't make that effort and don't take the time to do so, because it is easier and quicker to just not do it and completely ignore it. And I just think there is absolutely no excuse for that. I don't think everything needs to be beginner friendly. Not every pattern is for you as a beginner, and it's not the pattern designer's responsibility to make it suitable for you. You know, all patterns should have some sort of notes or guidance on who the pattern is most suitable for, you know, beginners, advanced, intermediate. And if a designer is releasing a pattern that is not beginner friendly, it is not then their task to make it accessible to you. It is your task to teach yourself the skills and knowledge needed in order to make this more difficult pattern. Beginners should use that as like motivation to get better at knit or crochet. I also don't think patterns are there to teach you how to knit or crochet, unless a pattern specifically says that this is going to teach you a certain method or is genuinely going to teach you crochet or knit as someone who has never knit or crochet before. Unless that is being stated, you should have the basics down before you knit something. Learning a new skill, I think, should be frustrating, and it's not the pattern designer's fault if you don't know how to do something. It is sort of expected that you either know the skills needed for a pattern or that you're willing to teach yourself. Obviously, a good pattern should have links and resources to, you know, be able to teach yourself something. I think that's like common knowledge for most people, but I think some beginners who are really new to the craft are kind of expecting all of that to happen with like their first project. And I also genuinely think within our culture of like instant gratification, instant accessibility to anything you'd ever want in life, you know, Amazon Prime, you get everything delivered next day. Social media, you have all the knowledge at your fingertips straight away. I think we as a society have forgotten that things take time and a skill needs practice. You're not going to be good at something straight away. And with knit and crochet, if you follow a pattern and it turns out shit, is it because the pattern is shit or because you are bad at knit and crochet? And there's nothing wrong with being bad at it, you just need a bit more practice. Obviously, some patterns are badly written. That is not what I'm talking about, and that, you know, is unfortunate as a beginner if that is kind of what's hindering you. But most of the time, you probably just need a bit more practice. And I'm speaking from personal experience. I used to struggle so much following patterns and would get so frustrated, which is why I freehanded everything. But now looking back, I just didn't take the time to really practice specific techniques in order to be able to follow patterns. And also you have to practice reading patterns. You have to practice following instructions. Part of learning a new skill was also learning how to learn the skill. On the flip side, I've seen a lot of knitters complain about how everything at the moment is beginner friendly. Most patterns are catered to beginners, and I think, you know, from a pattern designer point, that makes complete sense because there are more beginners out there. Not that many people will persevere with the skill to become advanced or intermediate, but I think the complaints and the criticism that people have for a lot of pattern designers that their patterns are too basic or whatever is really misplaced, because I think as an advanced or intermediate knitter and crocheter, you should also have the skill to look for more advanced patterns. There are a bunch of advanced and more difficult patterns out there. If you've been doing the craft for so long, you should be able to find them. You know, it's a very simple search on Ravelry on how to find these patterns or how to identify more difficult stitch patterns and color works and things like that. I just don't understand why people take it so personally that beginner patterns aren't catered to them. It's very much the bean soup theory of not everything is for you. A lot of the sort of criticism for like petite knit, for example, is that her patterns are really basic and really boring. Find something else to knit then. It's clearly not for you. That shouldn't warrant people going online to then chat shit about her just because the patterns aren't for you. There are so many designers out there that you can follow and support instead. It doesn't mean that all the other things are therefore automatically bad. I've fallen victim to this next thing myself, so I'm totally holding myself accountable to this as well. But I really hate when people talk negatively about like grandma looking designs, or talk about this generation of fiber arts as like better than the designs that people made 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, because I just think it's quite disrespectful. Like, the only reason why we young knitters and crocheters are able to do this is because of all the designs that came beforehand and all of the knowledge that was passed down from the generations before us. So to kind of say that, I don't know, knitting and crocheting is so much better now because the designs are so much better is just quite disrespectful. And it's also just like a sign of the times. Like, obviously you would say that because most people also wouldn't wear the clothes that were worn 50 years ago, but that was really popular 50 years ago. It just feels really out of touch and quite like pretentious. Like, why do you think you're better than all of the generations that came before you and that made this hobby popular? It also kind of reminds me of some of the gatekeeping that is going on online surrounding the fiber arts. I became particularly aware of this when the Channel 4 Game of Wool show came out, or even before it came out, like when the discourse started surrounding the show and like people's opinions of the show. And I swear to God, I saw a couple TikToks where people said they didn't want knitting to become popular. And I cannot believe that people think this way. Like, who are you to claim knitting and crocheting? You think this is like some niche little hobby? Because it really isn't. It's incredibly popular. And it blows my mind that especially people of the younger generation, which I am a part of, claim this whole thing to be like new and fresh and to be belonging to them only. There's like two things particularly wrong with that. First of all, it doesn't belong to you. Again, reiterating my point beforehand, this wasn't made popular by us young people. If anything, this belongs to the generation, mostly women, that came before us, who people are kind of just completely erasing within this conversation by saying that like they don't want knitting to become popular. At the same time, why are you gatekeeping this craft from newbies? You know, that's such a bad criticism of a TV show, to be popularizing a craft that brings so much joy to people. And especially in this like age of AI, we should be encouraging people to pick up physical hobbies, crafts, physical skills, and not like try and like contain it and keep it between us, because this whole craft is based on community. And I've definitely also kind of detached myself from that at the beginning because everything was so online during COVID, which is when I started to also post online about my knitting and crocheting. I think maybe that's where people have kind of like forgotten that this isn't like a self-contained skill. It thrives off community and people learning from each other, sharing knowledge. Knitting and crocheting has existed way longer than social media, and before social media people were meeting up and they were sharing tips and tricks in person. I don't understand why you wouldn't want other people to do the thing that you also love so much. Like, I was so happy when my friends started showing interest in learning to knit, or chatting to them about different designers and different patterns, or yeah, even like goss within the community. Let's just all remember that knitting and crocheting is for everyone. Why would you try and gatekeep that from people? It's just so ridiculous to me. Then I don't think this is particularly controversial, possibly more of a personal subjective take, but I don't think the Sophie scarf by Petite Knit is beginner friendly, and it always stresses me out when I see a beginner like on YouTube or TikTok or whatever and knit the Sophie scarf and say how much they're struggling and how they kind of can't find the motivation to finish it. And I always just think, drop the Sophie scarf, put it aside, pick it up another time. Yes, it doesn't have like particularly difficult techniques, but you have to be so concentrated to do it because of the constant increases and later the decreases and creating the sort of smooth tensioned I-cord edge. It's definitely not something that I would recommend my friends do as one of their first projects. That's not to say that I don't like the Sophie scarf. I think it's amazing and it's a great project to do later down the line, but definitely not as like the first, second or third project, I'd say. And then my last take, which I'm a little bit nervous to talk about in a way, and that I'm definitely not like 100% on yet, but that I've just kind of like been thinking about, is that I don't think knit clubs or knit meetups should be ticketed or like paid. I've actually been thinking about ways that I can like do a knit meetup, knit club, either here in Norwich or in London or somewhere in Germany. I would go all across the world to do it. However, there is a lot of time and energy and logistics that goes into like organizing an event like that. There's, you know, a lot of time that you have to spend on it, and you kind of want that time to be compensated. So I completely understand why these events are paid or, you know, paid ticketed. However, the reason why I've never done one is personally, like being completely honest, don't see the benefit to me of doing a knit event unless I'm kind of getting paid for it. Or beyond that, obviously networking and community building is very valuable and a great sort of result of these knit events. However, I think what's so great about knitting and crocheting is how you don't need a lot of money to do it. Yes, the material costs money, yarn, hooks, needles. You can get them cheap, you can get them secondhand. Overall, it doesn't cost a lot. Like in comparison, for example, I used to do photography and that was quite an expensive hobby to keep up. There are knit clubs and meetups and basically every city and every town that has a yarn shop where you can go for free and you can build a community and connect with people and ask for advice. And because those places already exist, I don't really think other knit meetups should be paid. And I actually stand by that so strongly that I don't ever see myself doing a knit event unless I can like financially afford it. Now there is a point to be had obviously of like you have to rent a space for these knit events, and a lot of the time the organizer would have to pay the event space. So I can see why those events would be paid. I personally think that can only be justified if the ticket price includes like a drink already paid for when you arrive or a little gift or whatever, just so that the person attending gets something out of the experience that they wouldn't get from their local knit group that they can join for free. I don't know if I'm articulating this well enough. I guess there's also an argument to be had where like you can't really complain about an event being ticketed because there are free places to go to. So like if you don't want to pay for a knit event, you don't have to. You can go to the free one that's local to you. I get that as well. It's definitely like a nuanced thing, a nuanced conversation to be had. I don't think organisers who are charging for these knit events are doing anything unethical at all. You know, like I said, there is a lot of work that goes into it. People are obviously interested in these events. They want to join them. So if there's a demand, you can, you know, meet that demand. And like I said, I would also like to do a knit event. I've, you know, get asked a lot, but it's just like whether I feel okay with charging for people to meet up to knit for like 3 hours when they can be doing that for free at home. I don't know, I just still personally within myself feel a bit yucky about that. It maybe also has to do with like the lack of third places that we have anyways, and it's really difficult to find things to do or places to meet people for free. And I think like the local knitting groups where you kind of like go to the pub or to a cafe or whatever once a week or once a month, and you obviously still have to pay for like a drink or whatever, but that I think is such a good example of what third spaces should be. You know, you spend a lot of time together, you meet people, you build a community, but at a very low financial loss. to each individual. But yeah, that is everything that I wanted to talk about today, all the controversial takes I have. I was a little bit unsure on whether to film this video because I do think this is kind of like contributing to the negativity that can be out there in the community, and that can kind of contribute to this like gatekeepy feeling. But I do think some of the points that I have raised, like the size inclusivity, is good to talk about maybe, but as I said at the beginning, I'm just one person. If you disagree with me, let me know down below. Let's keep the conversation going. I know for a fact, actually, that a lot of people love making the Sophie scarf as a beginner. So like, I know I am wrong, but like to me personally, I am right. This is where I got to with joining my squares. I'm just doing the 4th row. I still have a good stack here. But yeah, I had fun. I hope you did too. Thank you always so much for watching, and maybe I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.